He sat in that kitchen at 2 in the morning, 6 empty chairs, a bottle of whiskey, and he wrote a letter in his dead mother's name begging a stranger to come save him. He never expected anyone to answer. Then she stepped off the train with $12 and a suitcase and ruined everything. This is their story. The letter said there would be a woman waiting at the station, an older woman, kind and gentle. The letter said the ranch needed a woman's touch, said she would be treated fairly, given a warm home, and shown the kind of respect that a decent man owes a decent woman. The letter did not say that the woman who wrote it had been dead for 10 years. It did not say that the ranch sat 15 miles from the nearest town across open prairie, where the wind blew so hard in winter it could strip the hide off a horse. And it most certainly did not say that 3 of the tallest, broadest, most silent men she had ever laid eyes on would be standing on the platform of Copper Creek Station staring at her like she had fallen out of the sky. Clara Whitfield stepped off the train into the cold. Snow fell in thick curtains across the platform. She held her suitcase with both hands, knuckles white, and looked for the face she had been imagining for 6 months. Mrs. Mary Thornton, a mother, a woman who had promised safety. Instead, she found them. 3 men beside a flatbed wagon, all of them over 6 feet tall, all of them broad enough to block a doorway without trying, all of them watching her with expressions so different from one another that Clara felt she was being judged by a jury of 3. She did not know their names yet. She did not know that the oldest one had written the letter himself in handwriting he copied from his dead mother on a night so lonely he thought the silence might kill him. She did not know that the middle one carried a revolver on his hip and trusted no living woman since the last one had taken his savings and vanished. She did not know that the youngest one had his mother's smile and his father's stubbornness and a gift for reading people that would make him the first to see the truth. She knew none of this. All she knew was that the air was 20 degrees below freezing, her shoes had holes in them, and the $12 in her coat pocket were all that stood between her and the street. Before we go any further, if you are new here, hit that subscribe button. I share new frontier stories every week. And drop a comment while you are listening. Tell me where you are tuning in from tonight. Now then, let me take you back to where it all started. The train had left Chicago 4 days earlier. Clara Whitfield sat alone in a car that held 6 other passengers at the start and none by the time it crossed into Montana territory. One by one, they had gotten off at stations along the way, collected by waiting families, swallowed by small towns, absorbed back into lives that had people in them. Clara had no one waiting. She had a suitcase made of leather so old it was cracking at the seams. Inside it, she kept 3 dresses, a small Bible with a cracked spine, a sepia photograph of her parents so faded their faces were more memory than image, in the letter. She read that letter so many times during the journey that she could recite it with her eyes closed. The paper was yellowed. The handwriting was neat, but slightly unsteady, the kind of script that suggested an older hand, a careful mind. It was signed Mrs. Mary Thornton, and it described a cattle ranch in Montana territory, 3 hard-working sons, and a life that needed a woman in it. My boys are good men, the letter said, strong and honest, but this house has been without a woman too long. I am looking for a young lady of good character who is willing to work hard and build a life in the West. You will be treated with kindness and respect. That is my promise. Clara had answered that advertisement not because she dreamed of romance on the frontier. She answered it because she had nowhere else to go. 6 months earlier, she had been Clara Whitfield of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, orphaned since the age of 7. Raised in St. Catherine's Home for Girls, where a nun named Sister Agnes had taught her to read, to write, to keep accounts, and to never let anyone see her crime. At 18, she left the orphanage and found work as a housekeeper for the Hargrove family. Franklin Hargrove was a textile merchant. His wife, Mrs. Adelaide Hargrove, was the closest thing to a mother Clara had known since losing her own. Then Adelaide died, and Franklin Hargrove, 55 years old, red-faced from whiskey, began to visit Clara's room at night. Not every night, not at first, but the knocks came, the doorknob turned, the voice through the woods said things no employer should ever say to a young woman in his care. Clara bolted the door. She pushed the dresser against it. She slept with a kitchen knife under her pillow and her shoes on her feet in case she needed to run. When Hargrove finally cornered her in the hallway one evening, his hand closing around her wrist, his breath sour with liquor, and told her she owed him for the years he had kept her fed and clothed, Clara did the only thing left to do. She hit him with a candlestick. She ran down the stairs. She took her suitcase from the closet by the back door, and she left that house in the dark. Behind her, Hargrove's voice followed into the street. "I will find you, Clara Whitfield. I will tell the police you stole from me. You will have nowhere to hide." She hid anyway. She found a boarding house. She found the newspaper. She found the advertisement. And now she was here. Copper Creek, Montana Territory. 3 weeks before Christmas, 1887. Standing on a wooden platform in shoes with holes holding a suitcase with everything she owned, looking at 3 men who looked like they had been carved from the same mountain. The one in the middle spoke first. He was the tallest, 6'5" at least, with shoulders wide enough to carry timber. His hat was brown and pulled low, shadowing a face that was all hard angles and weathered skin. She could see streaks of gray at his temples, lines around his eyes, from years of squinting into sun and wind. His jaw was square, shadowed with stubble, and there was a small scar on the bridge of his nose. His eyes were gray, storm gray, the color of the sky before lightning. His hands held the reins of the Ladhoryaminam. They were enormous, calloused, the hands of a man who had worked every day of his life and expected to work every day until he died. "I'm looking for Mrs. Mary Thornton," Clara said. Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. She held out the letter. The tall man in the middle took it, read it, and something happened on a hidyate that Clara almost missed because it was so fast. A flash of recognition. Then something else. Something that looked almost like fear. Then nothing. His expression closed like a door slamming shut. "My mother has been dead," he said. His voice was low, rough-edged, the kind of voice that did not waste words. 10 years now. Clara felt the blood leave her face. Dead. But the letter. The man to the right stepped forward. He was leaner than the first built, more like a coiled rope than a wall, with sharp gray eyes that swept over Clara the way a man checks a fence line for weakness. He had a small scar across the bridge of his nose, and his hand rested near the revolver on his hip, not threatening, just habitual. The way he stood in front of everything unknown. "She died in 77. This one said, voice like a blade on a whetstone. "Who sent you here?" The third man, the youngest, leaned against the wagon with his hat in his hand. He was as tall as the other two, but carried it differently. Easier. There was a dimple on his left cheek, and his eyes, the same gray as his brother's, held something the others lacked. Warmth. "Boone," the young one said. "She just got off a train. She is freezing. At least let her explain." Clara held out the letter with both hands. They were shaking, not from cold, from the realization that the safety she had traveled 3,000 miles to find might not exist. The tall one, the one in the middle, passed the letter to the sharp-eyed one called Boone. Boone read it, looked at his brother. "This looks like Mother's hand." Silence. The kind of silence that has weight. The tall one's jaw clenched. His knuckles went white on the reins. Then he spoke, and his voice carried the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "She comes with us. For now. Until we sort this out." Boone opened his mouth to argue. "I have decided." 2 words, final as a closing gate. Boone shut his mouth. The younger one smiled and stepped forward, reaching for Clara's suitcase. "Welcome to Montana, miss. I am Wyatt. The quiet one is Caleb, my oldest brother. That cheerful fellow with the gun is Boone. Do not let him scare you. He looks at everybody that way, even the dog." Clara climbed onto the wagon. She sat in the back beside her suitcase and watched Copper Creek shrink behind her. A handful of wooden buildings along a muddy street, a church steeple, a saloon, a post office, all of it disappearing into the falling snow until there was nothing left but white prairie in every direction and the distant gray teeth of the Absaroka Mountains on the horizon. No one spoke for the first hour of the ride except Wyatt. Caleb drove, eyes forward, jaw set, silent. Boone sat half-turned, watching Clara the way a man watches a stranger who might be carrying a weapon. Wyatt pointed out landmarks as they passed. "That is Elk Creek, trout in the summer thick as your arm. Caleb is the best fisherman in the family, but he will never admit he enjoys it. He calls it sourcing provisions." Wyatt grinned. Caleb did not turn around, but his shoulders shifted. The closest thing to a laugh the man seemed capable of. That fence line marks the south boundary of the ranch. Father built it the first year. By hand, every post, no machine. Caleb repairs it every spring. Wyatt paused. Father used to say we built this place with our own hands. Caleb is the most like him. The Thornton Ranch appeared in the valley like a fortress against the white. A two-story log house, heavy timbered, solid. Not beautiful, but permanent. The kind of house built by men who expected to survive anything the weather could throw at them. A large barn, a grain shed, cattle pens stretching toward the far fence, a bunkhouse for the ranch hands beyond the main corral, smoke rising from the chimney, the smell of pine horse leather and dried manure, the smell of the frontier. Inside the house told a different story. Clara saw it immediately because reading houses was a skill she had carried since her years as a housekeeper. You could understand the people inside by the state of the rooms. The floors were dusty, dishes stacked in the basin, not filthy but unsorted. The cook stove was caked with soot. Food in the kitchen amounted to smoked meat, dried beans, and coffee. Curtains hung gray with dust. Good fabric chosen by a woman's eye, but unwashed since that woman died. The dining table had 6 chairs. 3 showed wear, 3 were pushed against the wall covered in dust. This family did not lack money. The house was solid. The furniture was quality. What they lacked was care. Someone to make a house into a home instead of just a shelter. An old man sat by the stove when they walked in. He was 65 if he was a day face creased like old leather, a pipe clamp between teeth worn to nubs. He looked at Clara, then at Caleb. Then a knowing smile spread across his weathered face. "So, she really came," the old man said. Caleb shot him a look sharp enough to cut glass. The old man, whose name was Jedediah Hawkins, but whom everyone called Jed, drew on his pipe and said nothing more. His eyes, old but keen, crinkled with private amusement. Caleb led Clara upstairs to a small bedroom on the second floor. The room was cleaner than the rest of the house, as if someone still dusted it regularly even though no one lived there. A single bed with a patchwork quilt, a wooden dresser, a mirror, and on the windowsill a glass jar holding dried lavender flowers faded almost to white. "This was my mother's room," Caleb said. He stood in the doorway. He did not step inside. "You can stay here for now." Then he turned and walked away quickly like a man leaving a room that contained something he could not name. Clara set down her suitcase, sat on the bed, and for the first time since Philadelphia she let herself cry. Not from sadness, from the overwhelming confusion of being in a place she did not understand, surrounded by men she did not know, holding a letter written by someone who was either dead or imaginary. But the room was warm, the quilt smelled of cedar, and for the first time in a very long time, she was not afraid. The next morning, Clara woke before dawn. Habit. The orphanage had trained it into her bones. 4:30 every morning, rain or shine, and Sister Agnes standing in the dormitory doorway with a candle and a voice that could wake the dead. She went downstairs and she worked. She swept the kitchen floor. Wood shavings dust horsehair tobacco crumbs from old Jed's pipe. She washed the basin of dishes in well water, so cold it turned her fingers red using lye soap she found beneath the sink. She built up the fire in the cast iron stove, a process that required knowledge most city women did not possess. You had to rake the coals, add kindling at the right angle, adjust the flue damper to control the draw, wait for the iron to heat evenly before cooking. No knobs to turn, no switches, just ironwood fire and the patience to let them find their balance. She found ingredients: flour in the bin, lard in a covered tin, salt, eggs from the hen house out back, still warm, which meant the hens had been fed recently even though no one seemed to care about the rest of the house. She mixed biscuit dough the way Sister Agnes had taught her. Flour, lard, salt, buttermilk, mixed quick, with cold hands, folded twice, never more cut with the rim of a tin cup laid on the hot griddle. Bacon from the smokehouse, sliced thick fried until the fat rendered and the edges curled crisp. Eggs cooked in the bacon grease, coffee boiled strong and black in a copper kettle. Wyatt came down first. He stopped in the kitchen doorway and breathed deep nostrils, flaring eyes going wide. "Caleb, Boone, get down here now." Boone came next. He sat at the table without a word and ate 2 full plates and did not look at Clara once. But he ate everything she put in front of him, and when he was finished, he set his fork down with a precision that suggested he was thinking carefully about what he had just experienced. Caleb came down last. He stopped in the kitchen doorway the way Wyatt had, but he did not call out. He stood there, looking at Clara standing beside his mother's stove, wearing his mother's apron, her yellow hair tied back her cheeks, pink from the heat. The light from the stove window fell across her face and made her eyes look like blue water. Something moved on Caleb's face. Not a smile. Something deeper. Something he grabbed with both hands and shoved back down before it could reach the surface. He sat down. He ate. He said, "You do not have to do this." Clara said, "I do not sit idle, and I want to earn my keep while I am here." That phrase, "while I am here," it hung in the air between them like smoke. Caleb nodded, ate, said nothing more. Over the following week, Clara proved herself not through words, but through work. She understood instinctively what the framework of frontier life demanded, and she met it with quiet efficiency. She cleaned that kitchen until the wood floor shone for the first time since Mary Thornton had died 10 years ago. She organized the food stores and calculated in her head enough provisions for 5 people through March if managed carefully. She mended Boone's torn shirt and left it folded on his bed, the stitching neat and professional. She noticed the ranch accounts on Caleb's desk, a leather ledger filled with numbers that were disorganized and in several places simply wrong. She said nothing about it, not yet, but she remembered. Each brother revealed himself through action, not through speech. This was a household where words were expensive and deeds were the common currency. Caleb rose before 4 every morning and worked until dark. He fed the horses, checked the cattle-repaired fence rails, broken by the weight of snow, and split firewood with an axe that fell with mechanical precision, every stroke dividing the oak log exactly in half. He brought coffee to the ranch hands in the bunkhouse while the sky was still black. He checked every cow and calf before he ate breakfast. He did not complain. He did not speak of being tired. He simply worked the way the mountains simply stood. But Clara noticed the small things. Every morning, the snow in front of the door was cleared before she woke. Someone had shoveled it. She never saw who, but the boot prints were large and the shovel strokes were efficient. Caleb's boot prints. Caleb's strokes. He stacked extra firewood beside the kitchen stove more than any normal winter required, as though he wanted to make absolutely certain she was never cold. He fixed the loose bracket on the kitchen shelf that had pinched her hand on her second day. He left a sheepskin coat outside her bedroom door one morning, folded carefully smelling of cedar, his mother's coat. He said nothing about any of it. Boone rode the fence line every day, checking for tracks, signs of trespass, anything wrong. He cleaned his revolver every evening, a ritual as regular as breathing. He watched Clara with those sharp gray eyes, measuring, calculating, not hostile exactly, but not warm either. Undecided. Then one morning he picked up the shirt she had mended, examined the stitching, and gave a single nod so slight it was almost invisible. He did not say thank you, but the nod was there. Wyatt trained the wild horses in the breaking pen. He talked to them in a low, even voice, never used a whip, showed a patience that bordered on supernatural. The horses trusted Wyatt before they trusted anyone. He taught Clara how to feed the chickens properly. Scatter the grain in an arc. Do not throw overhand. The hens spook at a hand raised above them. He told stories at the dinner table, about their father Jacob, stubborn as a bull, about their mother Mary, the gentlest woman who ever lived, about the winter of 8 and 3 when the snow reached the barn roof and they had to dig a tunnel just to reach the horses. Old Jed, the ranch hand who had worked for the Thorntons since Jacob first bought the land, sat on the porch each evening, smoking his pipe and watching the stars. He spoke to Clara in short sentences that carried the weight of long thinking. Young Caleb looks hard on the outside, soft on the inside, just hides it well. And once when Clara brought him coffee on the porch and asked if the winter would be a bad one, Jed looked at the sky and said, "Winter always ends, Miss Clara. Every one of them. You just have to outlast it." She held on to those words the way she held on to the letter, like a rope in the dark. 2 weeks after Clara arrived, Caleb took her into Copper Creek for supplies. It was her first encounter with the community, and it was not kind. Word travels fast in a small town. The news of the Thornton brothers bringing home a mail-order bride had reached every parlor, every porch, every table at the White Pine Saloon. And Cordelia Pruitt, wife of the dry goods merchant, self-appointed guardian of Copper Creek's moral standards, was ready. She intercepted Clara at the general store. 2 other women flanked her like deputies. "So, this is the girl the Thorntons purchased." Cordelia's voice was sweet as sugar and sharp as broken glass. How fascinating. I wonder what kind of woman sells herself through the mail. The two women giggled. Clara felt heat rise in her face. She wanted to shrink. She wanted to disappear. But she had spent 17 years in an orphanage and 4 years in a house with Franklin Hargrove, and both experiences had taught her the same lesson. If you show them you are wounded, they will wound you again. I did not sell myself to a Mrs. Pruitt. I answered an invitation to work on a ranch, no different from any honest woman seeking honest employment. Cordelia smiled, the kind of smile that has teeth in it. Honest employment? Of course, 3 unmarried men, 1 pretty young girl. I am sure it is all very proper. Caleb walked into the store at that moment. He heard the last sentence. His face went dark the way a valley goes dark when a thunderhead moves over the sun. He stepped beside Clara, his body between her and Cordelia. A wall of leather and muscle and quiet fury. Mrs. Pruitt. His voice was low, not loud, but the kind of low that makes people step backward without understanding why. Clara is a guest of my family. Anyone who disrespects her disrespects the Thornton name. I would advise you to choose your words more carefully from now on. Cordelia went pale. She lifted her chin. She walked out. On the wagon ride home, silence held for a long time. Then Caleb's eyes still on the road ahead said, "Do not let Pruitt get to you. Her mouth is wider than the Missouri Valley." Clara laughed, a small laugh, surprised out of her before she could stop it. Caleb glanced at her, quick, then back to the road. But the corner of his mouth, that severe straight line, lifted, 1 millimeter, half a second. Clara caught it. That night, Clara could not sleep. She went downstairs for water and heard voices from the parlor. Low, tense. The 3 brothers arguing. She stopped at the top of the stairs, in the dark, listening. Boone's voice sharp with frustration. "She has to go, Caleb. We did not send for any bride. That letter is either forged or a mistake. And she is a stranger living in Mother's room. How long do we keep pretending this is normal?" Wyatt's voice defending. "She cooks better than all 3 of us combined. She cleaned the house for the first time in years. And the next train is 5 days out. You want her sitting at the station for 5 days in December." Boone again. "Then 5 days, and she is on that train." Silence, long, then Caleb, his voice deeper than the others, heavy like stones settling at the bottom of a river. "Clara stays. But I have decided." The sound of a chair scraping. Boone standing. "You will regret this. When she brings trouble, and she will bring trouble, do not say I did not warn you." Footsteps, a door slamming, then quiet, the fire crackling, then Wyatt softly. "Caleb, she is staying because the ranch needs help or because of something else." A pause so long, Clara thought maybe Caleb had left the room. Then his voice, almost a whisper. "Go to bed, Wyatt." Clara crept back to her room. She lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling and understood. Half of this family wanted her here, half wanted her gone, and the man who had made the decision might not know himself why he made it. But she did not know what he had buried behind the locked door at the end of the hallway. And when she found it, everything between them would change. 1 week before Christmas, the sound of hooves in the yard brought everyone to the porch. A man rode in on a black horse, polished and gleaming despite the cold. He was tall, thin hawk faced with pale gray eyes and a precisely trimmed mustache going silver at the corners. He wore a black vest, a gold watch chain, and boots too clean for ranch country. Behind him rode 2 hired men and a lawyer from Helena. Hank Mercer, owner of the Mercer Ranch, the largest spread bordering Thornton land. A man who looked at everything the way a buyer looks at goods in a store window, calculating the price, calculating the angle. Caleb stepped off the porch. Boone and Wyatt flanked him. Shoulder to shoulder, a wall of Thornton men. "Mercer," Caleb's voice held no warmth whatsoever. "What do you want?" Mercer dismounted smoothly. He looked around the ranch with the expression of a man measuring a room for new furniture. Then he reached into his vest and produced a piece of paper. A promissory note, Jacob Thornton's signature at the bottom, dated 3 years prior. $2,000 borrowed during the drought of '84 to buy emergency cattle feed. Principal plus interest now totaling $3,500. Due by the end of February. If you cannot pay, Mercer said, his voice smooth as oiled leather, I will be forced to petition the court for 200 acres on the east side, the parcel with the creek running through it. Good land. Boone stepped forward, fists clenched. Our father never borrowed money from you. Mercer held up the note, smiled, the kind of smile that never reaches the eyes. His signature is right there, Boone. Ask any lawyer in the territory. Caleb looked at the note. He recognized his father's handwriting. Genuine. Jacob had hidden this debt, probably too proud to admit he needed help. Another secret from a man who was no longer alive to explain. 3,500, Caleb said slowly. We do not have that right now. I know you do not. Mercer's gaze drifted to the kitchen window. Clara stood there looking out, her blue eyes wide with worry. Mercer's pale gray eyes lingered on her. Too long. Then he turned back to Caleb. I am not an unreasonable man. End of February. If you cannot pay by then, we discuss the land. He mounted his horse, touched his hat brim, rode off with his men. The three brothers stood in silence. Wyatt spoke first. 3,500. We do not have it. This winter we lost 30 head. The fall cattle sale barely covered costs. Caleb looked at his calloused hands. Father kept this secret. He looked up, eyes hardening. But Mercer wants more than money. He wants the land, and he will not stop until he gets it. Clara heard everything from inside. She understood. This ranch, the only shelter she had, was under threat, and she was no longer a guest passing through. She was part of this fight now, whether they wanted her to be or not. The days that followed pressed down on the household like the low gray sky pressed down on the prairie. Caleb grew quieter than ever. He worked from dark to dark, barely eating, barely sleeping. Clara saw the lamp burning in his study past 2 in the morning. 3 in the morning, the yellow glow seeping under the door as he sat over the ranch accounts, searching for money that was not there. One night, Clara brought him coffee and found him at the desk with his head in his hands. The ledger was open, papers scattered. He looked like a man carrying a weight that was slowly crushing him. Caleb, he raised his head too fast. Was on the mic, but not fast enough. She saw what was underneath. Red-rimmed eyes. Exhaustion. The look of a man searching for an answer that did not exist. I am fine, he said. The most obvious lie Clara had ever heard. She set the coffee down. She looked at the open ledger. Even from across the desk, she could see the problems. Numbers that did not add up. Entries in the wrong columns. A financial picture drawn by a man who could manage 500 head of cattle, but could not manage a page of arithmetic. She wanted to say something, wanted to sit down and show him what she saw. But the set of his jaw and the way his hand moved to close the ledger told her this was not the moment. Caleb Thornton was not ready to accept help. Not yet, not from anyone, and especially not from a woman he was still pretending was temporary. So she left the coffee and went back upstairs. But she did not forget what she had seen. And she knew with the certainty of a woman who had balanced accounts since she was 16 years old, that when the time came, she would be ready. The night before Christmas Eve, the tension that had been building for 2 weeks finally broke. Boone had been drinking more whiskey than usual. He would never have admitted it, but this date carried weight for him. The anniversary of the day Ruby Dawson walked out of his life with a traveling merchant and $300 of his savings. He never spoke of it, but every year around this time, the whiskey bottle got lighter and his temper got shorter. He came in late and found Clara decorating the parlor. Ribbons, colored paper, a strand of tin stars she had cut and shaped herself. Things his mother used to do, things no one had done since she died. Something inside Boone came apart. What are you doing? Clara looked up. Decorating for Christmas. Wyatt said the family has not decorated since Mother died. That is right, because nobody here has the right to replace her. Boone stepped closer. He was a full foot taller than Clara, and in this moment, with whiskey in his blood and old wounds open, he looked dangerous. You walk into this house, you cook some meals, you hang some ribbons, and you think that makes you family. You think that makes you belong here. Clara set down the ribbon. Her hands trembled, but her voice did not. I am not trying to replace anyone, Boone. Then what are you trying to do? You show up from nowhere with a letter nobody wrote and you just stay. A pretty girl with a sad story and nowhere to go. His voice cracked with something that was not anger at Clara, but anger at everything that had gone wrong in his life. "Who sent you, Mercer? Are you a spy, or are you just a grifter looking for a free roof?" Clara did not retreat. She looked up into the gray eyes that were so like Caleb's, but filled with ice instead of sorrow. And she said, her voice shaking not from fear, but from the pain of being called what she was. "Not, I am here because I have nowhere else on this earth to go, Boone. I have no family, no home, no money. That letter was my last hope. If you want me to leave, say it. I will walk out that door tonight. But do not call me a liar, because I have never lied to anyone in my life." Tears on her cheeks. She did not wipe them. She did not look away. Heavy footsteps. Caleb appeared in the doorway. His face was granite. His eyes moved from Clara to Boone and back. Boone. One word. But it carried the weight of an ocean. "Caleb, you have to see outside now!" Boone's jaw clenched. He threw one last look at Clara. Then he walked out and slammed the door hard enough to rattle the windows. Caleb stood still. He looked at the ribbons on the floor where Clara had dropped them. He bent down, picked them up one by one, placed them back on the table with the care of a man handling something fragile. Then he said, without looking at her, "This is your home, for as long as you want to stay." 4 words, 4 simple words. Clara understood in that moment, with the ribbons on the table and the tears on her face and the big man standing in the doorway refusing to meet her eyes, because if he did, he might show her something he was not ready to show, that she was not going to leave this place. Not now, not ever. Christmas morning arrived quiet and cold. Wyatt had found a small pine tree and dragged it into the parlor. Clara and Wyatt decorated it with the ribbons, the colored paper, and the tin stars. Old Jed produced a bottle of whiskey he had been saving, and Clara, using every ingredient she could find in that kitchen, cooked a Christmas dinner that the Thornton house had not seen in a decade. Roast chicken from the coop, potatoes baked in the coals, winter vegetables from the root cellar, fresh bread, apple pie. They sat around the table, Caleb at the head where his father used to sit, Boone, Wyatt, Jed, and Clara at the other end where Mary Thornton used to sit. Lamplight fell on her yellow hair and made a kind of halo around her face. Boone had not apologized. But on the table that morning, Clara found a bundle of dried wildflowers, the kind that grew on the hillside in autumn. No note, no explanation, just flowers. Boone's way of saying what his mouth could not. Wyatt told stories. Jed sang an old song in a voice like gravel and honey. Boone drank his whiskey in silence, but did not leave the table early, for the first time. And Caleb, sitting at the head, looked down the table at Clara, at the woman who had walked into his life from a letter he wrote on the loneliest night of his existence. She was laughing at something Wyatt said, her eyes bright, her cheeks flushed, her whole face alive in a way that made the lamplight seem dim by comparison. Something cracked inside Caleb Thornton's chest. Not broke, not shattered, thawed, slowly, painfully. The way ice thaws on a creek in spring, 1 degree at a time, the water underneath it moving whether the ice wants it to or not. "Merry Christmas," Clara said, raising her glass of apple cider. "Merry Christmas," they answered, all of them, together. And in that moment, the house that had been a shelter for 3 lonely men began to become something else entirely. It began to become a home. January of 1888 came down on Montana like a hand closing into a fist. The temperature dropped to 20 below zero on the first night of the new year and did not rise above 10 degrees for the next 3 weeks. Snow fell so thick and so constant that the barn doors had to be shoveled clear every morning before the first light broke over the mountains. Wind came off the Absarokas, carrying a cold so sharp it cut through 3 layers of wool and found the skin beneath. The creek froze solid, the water troughs grew 2 inches of ice overnight every night, and every morning someone had to break that ice with an axe, bare hands burning against the frozen metal handle so the cattle could drink. This was the Montana that tested every homesteader who dared to stay. The Montana that separated the stubborn from the sensible, the living from the merely surviving. And in the middle of it, the Thornton Ranch ran like a machine built of muscle and willpower, and not much else. Caleb rose before 4. Every morning, no exceptions. He fed the horses in the dark grain, measured by feel in the pitch-black barn, the animal's breath making clouds in the lantern light. He checked the cattle in the near pens, walking the fence line, with old Jed counting heads, looking for any animal too weak to stand or too cold to move. A calf born in weather like this had maybe 2 hours before the cold took it. You checked the ears. If the ears were stiff and icy, the calf was dying. You carried it into the barn, wrapped it in blankets, held it near the stove until its blood warmed and its legs started kicking again. Caleb had done this more times than he could count. His hands, massive and calloused, could cradle a newborn calf with a gentleness that seemed impossible for a man his size. After the cattle, he split firewood. Oak logs cut in the fall and stacked to season, now frozen so hard the grain resisted the axe like iron. Every stroke required the full weight of his body behind it, and even then the logs sometimes refused to give. Caleb would set his feet, raise the axe to the height of his ear, and bring it down with a controlled violence that sent half the logs spinning into the snow and left the other half standing on the chopping block like a broken tooth. He did this for an hour every morning. More wood than the house needed. Far more, sorry. As though he was building a wall between Clara and the cold one split log at a time. Boone rode the perimeter. Every day, regardless of weather, he saddled his horse and checked the entire fence line of the Thornton property. 12 miles of barbed wire and cedar posts. He carried his revolver, a Winchester rifle in the saddle scabbard, and a coil of wire for repairs. He watched for tracks, wolves, mountain lions, but mostly he watched for boot prints that did not belong to Thornton men. Mercer's hired hands had been seen near the south boundary twice since Christmas, just inside the legal line, doing nothing illegal, just looking, measuring, the way vultures circle before they land. Wyatt worked the horses. The wild Mustangs he had captured in the fall needed daily handling, or they would go feral again. He stood in the breaking pen for hours in temperatures that would send most men to the stove, speaking to the horses in a low, steady voice, moving slowly, never raising a hand, letting them come to him on their own terms. One by one they learned to trust. The big bay stallion, the spotted mare, the gray gelding that had kicked a fence post clean in half the first week, but now followed Wyatt like a dog. And Clara. Clara became the backbone of the house. Breakfast was on the table at 5:30 every morning, hot and substantial. Biscuits, eggs, bacon, coffee, black enough to stand a spoon in. When the men came in from the cold, with frost in their beards and their fingers too numb to grip a cup, she wrapped their hands around hot mugs and waited until the shaking stopped before she let go. She kept the cook stove fire burning around the clock. She rationed the food stores with the precision of a quartermaster, calculating how many weeks of flour remained, how much salt pork, how many jars of preserved vegetables in the root cellar. She washed clothes and hung them near the fire to dry. She mended. She swept. She scrubbed. She did not do these things because anyone told her to. She did them because this was how Clara Whitfield had survived every stage of her life. You make yourself necessary. You become the person they cannot afford to lose. And then maybe they let you stay. One afternoon in the third week of January, Caleb found Clara struggling to split a piece of kindling in the yard. She had watched him do it 100 times and thought she understood the mechanics. She did not. The axe bounced off the frozen wood and nearly took her shin. Caleb walked over. He did not say anything about her technique. He did not smile at her struggle. He simply stood behind her, reached forward, and adjusted her grip on the handle. His hands over hers, repositioning, correcting the angle. It was the first time he had touched her. His hands were enormous, warm even through his work gloves. She could feel the controlled strength in them, the steadiness, and beneath that something else. Hesitation. As though the act of touching another person, even through leather, cost him something he was not sure he could afford. "Wait forward," he said. "Let the axe do the work. You are fighting it." He let go and stepped back, quickly, as though the contact had burned him. Clara swung, missed, swung again, missed. The third time the log split clean down the center, two perfect halves falling into the snow. Caleb gave a single nod, one nod. That was his version of applause. Wyatt, leaning on the fence rail of the horse pen, watched the whole thing with bright eyes and said nothing. But that evening at dinner, he made a point of asking Clara to pass Caleb the coffee and asking Caleb to hand Clara the bread, manufacturing small moments of proximity with the enthusiasm of a man who has been waiting for something to happen and is tired of waiting. The following week, Wyatt offered to teach Clara to ride. The gentlest horse on the ranch, a fat chestnut mare named Biscuit, stood patient as a church pew while Clara climbed into the saddle. Wyatt held the bridle and walked alongside, coaching. Heels down, back straight, relax your hands. She can feel when you are afraid, so do not be afraid. Clara was halfway through her first solo turn around the pen when Biscuit sneezed. The mare's whole body convulsed, and Clara, unprepared, pitched sideways. Wyatt caught her before she hit the dirt, one arm around her waist, both of them stumbling, and then they were laughing, real laughter, the kind that hurts your ribs and makes your eyes water. Caleb stood outside the fence. He was not laughing, but the lines around his eyes, the ones carved by years of squinting into sun and grief, shifted, changed shape. Just for a half second, they became the lines of a different expression, the lines of a man who wanted to laugh but had forgotten how to give himself permission. Clara saw it. She filed it away. One afternoon in late January, Clara sat in the kitchen peeling potatoes with old Jed. Snow fell outside the window in slow, fat flakes. The fire popped in the stove. Jed drew on his pipe, and in the way of old men who have lived long enough to understand that the most important things are said quietly, he began to talk. Caleb loved a woman once, Lenora Cartwright, storekeeper's daughter over in Copper Creek, the kind of person who walked into a room and the whole room got brighter. She had a laugh you could hear across a field, and she loved Caleb back. Loved him the way he needed to be loved, which is steady and without conditions, because that is the only kind of love a man like Caleb knows how to receive. Jed paused, drew on his pipe. The tobacco crackled. He proposed under the big oak tree south of the creek. The tree is still there. They set the wedding for March of '79. Another pause, longer this time. The snow kept falling. 3 weeks before the wedding, pneumonia came on fast. One day she had a cough. 4 days later, she could not stand. Caleb did not leave her side. Not once, not to eat, not to sleep. But it did not matter. Some fights you cannot win, no matter how strong you are. Silence. Jed looked at his hands. Old hands. Hands that had held reins and ropes and shovels for 6 decades. After Lenora died, Caleb locked her room. The room at the end of the hall, the one nobody enters. He put everything of hers inside it. The wedding dress she never wore. Her dried flowers. Her letters. He locked the door, and he has not opened it in 8 years. He buried his grief behind that door and threw away the key. Clara sat very still, the potato peeler motionless in her hand, the pieces falling into place. Why Caleb looked at her with that expression that was equal parts longing and terror. Why he stepped close and then pulled away. Why his hands trembled when he passed her the coffee across the table. Caleb Thornton was not afraid of Clara. He was afraid of love, because the last time he loved it nearly destroyed him, and he did not believe he could survive it again. 8 years, Clara whispered. Jed looked at her, those old eyes sharp as glass. For years he has kept that door shut. Maybe it is time somebody knocked. He drew on his pipe, exhaled. Winter always ends, Miss Clara, every one of them. She carried those words with her for the rest of the day. And that night, when she heard Caleb's boots stop in the hallway outside the locked room, pause for a long moment and then move on, she understood the sound for what it was. A man standing at the edge of something and not yet brave enough to jump. That same night, long after the house had gone quiet, Clara brought coffee to Caleb's study and found him hunched over the ranch ledger. Papers scattered, lamplight casting shadows under his eyes. He looked 10 years older than he was. He had been doing this every night for weeks, searching the numbers for money that did not exist, trying to find a way to save the land his father had cleared with his own hands, the land his mother had died on, the land where Lenora was buried on the hill beside the creek. Let me see the books, Clara said. He looked up. You do not... I kept accounts for the Hargrove family for 4 years. Every invoice, every payment, every debt. Let me look. He stared at her for a long time. Then he pushed the ledger across. Clara worked for 2 hours. She found what she expected. Caleb was a brilliant rancher and a terrible bookkeeper. He overpaid for feed because he never negotiated prices. He double-entered repair costs. He miscalculated interest on an equipment loan. And most importantly, he had completely overlooked the value of Wyatt's horses. 12 broken Mustangs ready for the spring market in Helena could bring $1,500 to $2,000 from the right buyer. She also had an idea about the promissory note. The note Mercer holds, Clara said carefully. Have you had a lawyer examine it? Caleb frowned. Father's signature is genuine. A genuine signature does not make a valid contract. A legal promissory note requires a witness signature, a notary seal, clear terms, and lawful interest rates. Does Mercer's note have all of those? Caleb went still. The way a man goes still when he realizes he has been looking at the ground so long, he missed the door right in front of him. I never checked. Then check. Caleb sent the note to Helena with Sheriff Harlan Bradley. The lawyer's response came back in 10 days. The note had no witness signature, no notary seal. The interest rate was above territorial usury limits. The note was not worthless, but it was severely weakened. Mercer could still sue, but the fight would be long, expensive, and uncertain. Clara presented the findings at the kitchen table. The entire household was there, all 5 of them. We can raise roughly $2,500 with the horses and cost reductions, she said. We offer Mercer $2,000 as good faith payment on the principal. We reject the interest as usurious. If he wants the land, he has to go to court, and our lawyer says the case is weak. She looked around the table. Caleb, Boone, Wyatt, Jed, all of them looking at her. The girl who had arrived with a suitcase and $12. Caleb spoke. His voice was rough. You just saved this ranch. Clara shook her head. I read the paperwork. You 3 built the ranch. No, Caleb looked at her, and this time he did not look away. We built it with our own hands, all of us, including you. The silence that followed was thick with things unsaid. Things that both of them felt and neither of them was ready to name. Then Wyatt leaned back in his chair and said, well, I think this calls for P. Clara, is there any P? And the tension broke and they laughed, and for one evening the weight of Mercer and debt and winter lifted just enough to let them breathe. In the middle of February, Sheriff Harlan Bradley rode out to the ranch with news that turned Clara's blood to ice. A man had arrived in Copper Creek 3 days earlier. He called himself a private investigator from Philadelphia. He was asking around town about a young blonde woman named Clara Whitfield, wanted for the theft of $500 and a silver necklace from the household of Franklin Hargrove. Clara was standing by the stove when Bradley delivered the news. She felt the color drain from her face the way heat drains from a room when the fire goes out. Caleb looked at her, his gray eyes steady, waiting. This was the moment. The fork in the road, lie or tell the truth. She chose truth, not all of it, but enough. She told them about the Hargrove household, about working as housekeeper for 4 years, about Adelaide Hargrove dying, about Franklin Hargrove beginning to visit her room at night. She used the word demands. She used the word refused. The 3 brothers were not stupid men. They understood what lived in the space between those words. I did not steal anything, Clara said. She looked directly into Caleb's eyes. That is a fabrication. Revenge for refusing him. Caleb held her gaze for a long time, then he turned to the sheriff. Harlan, if that investigator comes out here, you tell him Clara Whitfield is not in Copper Creek, and if he does not believe you, he can discuss it with me personally. Bradley nodded slowly. I already told him I had not seen the woman he described. He seemed to accept it. But Caleb, a man like Hargrove with money and lawyers, does not give up easily. Be careful. After the sheriff left, the atmosphere in the kitchen was heavy enough to touch. Boone looked at Clara with an expression she had not seen on his face before. Not suspicion, something more complicated, something that looked almost like recognition. Philadelphia's, Boone said, his voice flat and dry. So you are running. I am looking for safety, Clara corrected quietly. There is a difference. Boone looked at her for a long time. Then he nodded, a small nod, almost invisible. But it was there, and it meant everything, because it was the first time Boone Thornton had acknowledged Clara Whitfield as something other than a problem to be solved. He understood. Boone, who had trusted Ruby Dawson with his savings and his heart and been repaid with an empty drawer and a cold bed, understood what it felt like to be betrayed by someone who was supposed to protect you. That understanding cracked the last wall between them. 1 week later, Boone confirmed it. He found Clara alone in the barn feeding the chickens. He did not ease into the conversation. That was not Boone's way. The demands Hargrove made, they were worse than what you told us. Not a question, a statement. Clara's throat tightened. She nodded. Boone's jaw clenched. His fist closed at his side knuckles going white. The anger in his face was not directed at Clara. It was directed at a man in Philadelphia he had never met and would gladly have ridden 3,000 miles to find. He forced you. He tried. I got out before he could. Boone stared at the snow-covered field beyond the barn door. Wind pushed across the white expanse in long, rolling waves. Then he spoke, each word pulled out of him like a nail from old wood. Nobody takes you back there, not while there are Thorntons standing. Clara cried, not because she was sad, because for the first time since she fled Philadelphia, she had people standing between her and the dark. Not one person. 3. At the beginning of February, a wooden box arrived at the Thornton Ranch, delivered by one of Mercer's hired men. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was a dress. Emerald green silk, clearly expensive, clearly tailored, clearly made for Clara. The right size, the right length, as though someone had been watching her closely enough to know her measurements without asking. A card was tucked into the folds of the silk. The handwriting was precise and controlled. For Miss Whitfield, a small gift for the most beautiful woman in Montana. I hope she will wear it when we next meet. H. Mercer. Caleb read the card, and Clara saw something on his face she had never seen before. Pure rage. Not cold anger, not the controlled displeasure he showed when Cordelia Pruitt insulted Clara in the store. This was fire. His jaw clenched so hard the muscle jumped beneath the skin. His storm gray eyes went dark the way the sky goes dark in the seconds before a tornado drops. Send it back. His voice was quiet, the dangerous kind of quiet. Wyatt returned the dress to the Mercer Ranch with a message from Caleb. Miss Whitfield does not accept gifts from strangers. Mercer, according to Wyatt's report, had only smiled, a thin smile that did not belong on a human face. Tell Caleb she will not be a stranger for long. That sentence hung over the ranch like a storm cloud that refuses to break. 2 weeks later, Mercer came in person. He rode into the Thornton yard on a Tuesday afternoon with 3 hired men and a lawyer from Helena. His black horse gleamed despite the mud. His clothes were pressed. His boots were polished. He looked like a man visiting a property he already considered his. Caleb, Boone, and Wyatt came out onto the porch, 3 abreast, shoulder to shoulder, a wall of Thornton men. Nobody smiled. Mercer dismounted, adjusted his watch chain, looked around the ranch the way an appraiser looks at a house before an auction. Final offer, Caleb, $3,500 by the end of February, or I petition the territorial court for the east 200 acres. We need more time, Caleb said. Spring and cattle sales. Mercer raised a gloved hand, cutting him off. There is another arrangement. His pale gray eyes drifted to the kitchen window where Clara stood watching, blue eyes wide. Give me Miss Whitfield. I will marry her, and I will tear up the note, every penny forgiven. The silence that followed lasted perhaps 3 seconds. It felt like 3 years. Then Boone moved. He crossed the porch in 2 strides, seized Mercer by the collar of his expensive vest, and lifted the man clean off the ground with one arm. Mercer's boots dangled 6 inches above the dirt. His face went from composure to shock in less than a heartbeat. She is not property, Boone said, his voice a low growl that vibrated in his chest. She is not livestock. She is not a bargaining chip. Mercer's hired men drew their revolvers. Wyatt drew his. The lawyer from Helena took 4 rapid steps backward and pressed himself against the fence like a man trying to become invisible. Caleb stepped forward, placed his hand on Boone's shoulder. Put him down. Boone obeyed, but he did not step back. He stood there 6'4" of coiled muscle and fury, breathing hard, his hands still inches from Mercer's throat. Caleb faced Mercer directly. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. When Caleb Thornton spoke at full quiet, people listened the way they listened to thunder rolling across the mountains. Not because it was loud, because of what it promised. Mercer, Clara Whitfield is family. She is not something you buy or trade or negotiate for. If you say her name in that context again, in this yard, in that town, or anywhere else, I will not use words. He paused. A man keeps his word, and that is mine. Mercer straightened his vest, brushed the dust from his lapels. His composure returned, but beneath it, something else was visible. Calculation. The recognition that he had pushed too far and miscalculated the response. End of February, Mercer said. I will return with a court order. He mounted his horse and rode away with his men. The dust settled, the yard went quiet. Clara opened the kitchen door and stepped onto the porch. Her face was composed, but her hands were shaking. She had heard everything. I cannot let you lose this land because of me, Iman, she said. Caleb turned to her, and for the first time since she had arrived at this ranch, he spoke to her without any barrier between his words and his meaning. No careful distance, no measured restraint, just truth. Nobody loses anything because of you, Clara. You are here. That is not a negotiation. That is a fact. Wyatt smiled. Boone gave his curt nod. Jed, standing by the barn corner with his pipe, nodded as though confirming something he had known for a long time. That evening, they sat around the kitchen table, all five of them. And for the first time, they sat not as a rancher and his brothers and their guest and their hired man, but as something else. Something that did not have a name yet, but was beginning to take shape. Clara laid out the financial plan. Sell Wyatt's horses, push for top dollar in Helena, fulfill the sewing orders she had been taking from ranch wives and townswomen across the valley, cut every unnecessary expense, challenge the note's legality. She also proposed something new. The ranch had a surplus of cured cowhide in the bare barn, leftovers from previous seasons. If Wyatt could prepare the leather, Clara could sew it into gloves, belts, and saddlebags. Goods that frontier people would buy without hesitation. I do not know leather work, Clara said. I do, Wyatt said. Mother taught me when I was 12. And so it began. Wyatt prepared the hides. Clara cut and stitched. Caleb managed the sales through the general store in Copper Creek. Boone kept watch, each person with a role, each person necessary. Clara was no longer a guest. She was a partner. In the weeks that followed, while the household worked toward the deadline, the thing between Clara and Caleb grew the way ice thaws on a spring creek. Not all at once, not with any single dramatic moment, but steadily, unstoppably, 1 degree at a time. Small acts. The kind that mean nothing if you describe them, and everything if you are the one receiving them. Caleb left his mother's sheepskin coat outside Clara's door. He never mentioned it. Clara brewed his coffee stronger than everyone else's, the way she had noticed he preferred it. She never mentioned it. He repaired the shelf in her room that wobbled when she set a book on it. Done while she was in the kitchen. She only knew because the wobble was gone. She mended the tear in his favorite coat, the one along the right sleeve where barbed wire had caught it months ago. Done while he was in the barn. He only knew because the tear was gone. These were not grand gestures. They were the language of two people who did not yet trust themselves to use words for what they felt. One evening in late February, they sat on opposite sides of the kitchen table, lamplight between them. Clara was stitching a pair of leather gloves. Caleb was reading a book, one of the few in the house, a battered copy of something she could not see the title of. The fire crackled in the stove. Wind howled outside. Clara looked up. In the warm light, Caleb's face was different. The hard lines softened. The gray at his temples looked silver instead of old. His eyes, usually guarded, were focused on the page with an expression that was almost peaceful. He looked, Clara thought, like a man who might have been gentle his whole life, if life had been gentle to him. Caleb looked up, caught her staring. Their eyes met. 6 heartbeats passed. Neither moved. Neither spoke. The air between them thickened until Clara could feel it pressing against her skin like warm water. She looked away first, color rising in her cheeks. He looked down at his book, but he was not reading. His fingers gripped the edge of the pages until his knuckles turned white. A week before the February deadline, Clara finished the accounts one final time. She pushed the ledger across the table to Caleb and pointed to the bottom number. $2,512. That is everything we can raise. It is still short. Still short, Caleb agreed. They were both tired, both worried, both stretched thin by weeks of work and the pressure of a deadline they could not fully meet. In that moment of shared exhaustion and shared fear, Caleb reached across the table. Slowly, as though each inch required its own act of courage. He placed his hand over Clara's. His palm was rough, warm, large enough to cover her entire hand and then some. She could feel the calluses, the old scars, the strength held carefully in check. "We will find a way," he said. His voice was rough. "We." It was the first time he had used that word. Not I, not my family, we. A word that included her. Clara turned her hand over, palm up, pressed her skin against his, closed her fingers around his. They sat there, hand in hand, lamplight between them, saying nothing. Because there was nothing left to say that their hands were not already saying, they both knew. Neither said it, but they knew. What lived between them had crossed the line from gratitude a long time ago. It had crossed the line from respect. It had crossed the line from friendship. What it was now did not have a name yet, but it was growing, and neither of them, for all their fear, wanted it to stop. At the end of February, Caleb met Mercer one final time. Not at the ranch, in town. At the office of Sheriff Harlan Bradley, with a lawyer from Helena and $2,000 in cash. Caleb presented the case. The note lacked a witness, lacked a notary seal, carried interest above territorial usury limits. $2,000 was offered as good faith settlement of the legitimate principal. If Mercer wanted the land, he was welcome to file in territorial court. The Thornton lawyer would be happy to see him there. Mercer's own lawyer, a practical man who could count the hours and the dollars a court fight would cost, advised his client to take the money. Mercer took it. He tore the note in half. But before he left the sheriff's office, he looked at Clara, who had come with Caleb, and stood beside him throughout. "You win this round, Miss Whitfield." Clara looked him in the eye. "I was not playing a game, Mr. Mercer. I just did not quit." Mercer smiled, the cold kind, the kind that promises nothing is over. Then he walked out. The debt was settled. The land was safe. But as they rode back to the ranch together, the wagon wheels cutting fresh tracks in the late winter mud, Clara felt the next question forming. The one nobody had asked. The one that mattered more than money or land or legal documents. Spring was coming. The arrangement had been for the winter. Caleb's own words spoken on her first day. "For now, until we sort this out." The winter was ending. The snow was beginning to thin on the southern slopes. She could hear water running beneath the ice on the creek. And the question that neither of them could avoid much longer was simple enough to say and terrifying enough to keep them both silent. Would she stay or would she go? But what she did not know yet, what Caleb had hidden from her and from his brothers, and from everyone except old Jed, who had seen everything and said nothing, was the truth about the letter. The truth about who really wrote it. And when that truth came out in a cabin the size of a closet during the worst spring blizzard in 20 years, it would either bind them together forever or tear them apart. That storm was already building over the mountains, and it was coming for both of them. Spring came to Montana the way forgiveness comes to a stubborn man. Slowly, reluctantly, 1 degree at a time. The snow on the south-facing slopes began to thin in the first week of April. Water appeared beneath the ice on the creek, a quiet, rushing sound that Clara heard through the kitchen window each morning and mistook at first for wind. The sky, which had been a low ceiling of gray wool for 5 months, lifted and turned to blue so deep it hurt to look at. Calves stumbled on new legs in the near pen. The wild geese returned flying north in ragged arrows that honked and argued their way across the valley. And the prairie grass impossibly pushed green tips through the last patches of dirty snow, as though the earth itself had decided it was done with grieving and ready to try again. Clara stood on the porch each morning now, coffee in both hands, watching the world wake up. The air smelled different, and wet earth and sage and something sweet she could not name. The mountains still wore their white caps, but the valley was greening, and the light had changed warmer, now golden instead of silver, the kind of light that made everything look possible. She was happy. The realization arrived one morning without announcement, the way a bird lands on a fence post. Just there. She was happy. Not the loud kind, not the kind that announces itself. The quiet kind. The kind that comes from knowing where you will sleep tonight and who will be at the table when you sit down to eat. The kind that comes from belonging. But happiness, Clara had learned, always carries a shadow. And the shadow hanging over her was a sentence Caleb had spoken on her very first day at this ranch. She could still hear it in his low, rough voice, precise as a fence post driven into frozen ground. "For now, until we sort this out." The winter was over. The arrangement had been for the winter. Nobody had spoken those words aloud in months. Nobody needed to. They lived in the silence between every conversation and the half-second of hesitation before Caleb passed her the salt at dinner in the way Boone looked at her, sometimes with an expression that seemed to be asking a question he did not know how to phrase. Would she stay or would she go? Clara did not know. And the reason she did not know was not about Montana or the ranch or the cold or Mercer or any of the practical considerations that a practical woman should weigh. The reason was Caleb. Caleb, who had given her his mother's room and his mother's coat and his quiet protection without ever saying why. Caleb, who looked at her across the dinner table with gray eyes that held something enormous and unnamed. Caleb, who had held her hand over a ledger in lamplight and used the word we as though it were a vow. She loved him. She knew this the way she knew the stove was hot. Not because anyone told her, because she had touched it. But did he love her, or did he simply need her? Was she Clara to him, or was she the answer to a letter he had written in desperation on the loneliest night of his life? Was she the woman he wanted, or was she just the woman who came? She could not ask. The question was too large, and the risk of the answer was too great. Wyatt, as it turned out, had no such reservations. He found Caleb in the barn one evening brushing down the big bay gelding after a long day checking the fence line. The barn smelled of hay and horse sweat and leather. Light came through the slats in dusty golden columns. Caleb, what? I need to say something, and I need you to hear it. Caleb did not stop brushing the horse. Then say it. If you do not tell Clara how you feel about her, I swear on our mother's grave I will tell her myself. The brush stopped. Caleb stood very still, his back to Wyatt, his hand flat on the horse's flank. Wyatt, I am serious. You look at her like she is the sunrise. She looks at you like you are the only solid ground in the world. The two of you orbit each other every single day without ever touching, and it is killing me. It is killing Boone. It is killing Jed. The horses can feel it. The chickens are upset. The chickens are not upset. The chickens are devastated, Caleb. I have spoken with them. Silence. The horse shifted its weight. Outside, a meadowlark sang 3 notes and stopped. You are afraid, Wyatt said. Quieter now, the joke gone from his voice. I know you are afraid, because of Lenora, because you think loving someone means losing them. But Clara is here. She is alive. She is strong, and she is going to leave if you do not give her a reason to stay. Caleb did not answer, but that night Wyatt heard his oldest brother's boots climb the stairs, walk down the hallway, and stop. Stop at the locked door, the door that had not been opened in 8 years. The boots stood there for a very long time. Then they walked away. The blizzard came in the first week of May. Nobody expected it. May in Montana is supposed to be spring. Calving season, green grass and running water, and the first warm days that make you forget winter was ever real. But Montana does not care about expectations. Montana does what it wants. The sky went from blue to charcoal in less than an hour. The wind shifted north and brought a cold so sudden the temperature dropped 30 degrees between noon and 3. By 4 o'clock, the snow was falling so thick you could not see the barn from the porch. By 5, it was a whiteout. The old-timers called it a killing storm, the kind that buried cattle standing up and froze men in their saddles. Caleb and Clara were out in the south pasture when it hit. They had ridden out together to check on a group of first calf heifers that Caleb was worried about. The heifers were fine, the sky was not. We cannot make it back, Caleb said. He had to shout over the wind. Snow drove into his face and caked in his eyebrows. Too far, too blind. What do we do? Line shack, half-mile south, stay close. He took her horse's bridle in his hand and led both animals through the wall of white. Clara held on to the saddle horn and trusted him. There was nothing else to do. The world had disappeared. There was no ranch, no fence, no mountain, no sky. There was only snow and wind and the broad back of Caleb Thornton, moving through the storm like a man who had fought this particular enemy before and intended to win again. The line shack was a box, 12 feet by 10, log walls chinked with mud, a tin stove the size of a bread box, a plank bed with a straw tick mattress and 2 wool blankets that smelled of mouse and old smoke, A shelf with a kerosene lamp, 3 cans of beans, and a tin of coffee so old it had rusted shut. A wood pile beside the door enough for maybe 2 days. Caleb got the horses under the lean-to behind the shack. He wedged the door shut against the wind. He built a fire in the tin stove with hands so cold the matches shook, and the first 3 attempts died before the kindling caught. On the fourth tri-flame, on the fifth-minute heat, the tiny shack began to warm the ice on the inside of the window glass, turning to rivulets of water that ran down the wall and pooled on the dirt floor. They were trapped. The storm did not stop that night. It did not stop the next morning. It howled around the shack like a living thing, shaking the walls, pushing snow through cracks in the chinking piling drifts against the door until opening it required Caleb's full weight. 24 hours, 2 people, a room smaller than a horse stall, a fire, 2 blankets, and no place left to hide. Clara spoke first. "Caleb, I want to tell you something, and I need you to hear all of it before you say anything." He was sitting on the floor with his back against the wall, the fire casting orange light across half his face. He nodded. She told him everything, not the careful version she had given before, not the version with the difficult parts softened and the worst parts omitted. Everything. St. Catherine's, the nuns, Sister Agnes teaching her to read by candlelight after the other girls were asleep, the loneliness of growing up without a single person in the world who was required to love you. The Hargrove house, Adelaide who was kind, who taught Clara to arrange flowers and balance books and set a proper table. Adelaide dying, Franklin Hargrove and his whiskey breath and his nighttime visits to her door. The knocking, the turning of the handle, the sound of his voice through the woods saying things that still made her skin crawl years later. The candlestick, the running, the street. "I came here because I had no other choice," Clara said. Her voice was steady. She had practiced being steady for 24 years. "Your mother's letter, the letter I thought was your mother's, was the only thing between me and the gutter. I did not come for romance. I did not come for adventure. I came because I was going to die on the street if I did not." She paused, breathed. The fire popped. "But that is not why I am here now. I am here now because this is my home, because Wyatt makes me laugh and Boone makes me feel safe and Jed tells me things I need to hear, because this ranch is the first place I have ever belonged." Another pause. Longer. "And because of you." Her voice dropped, almost a whisper. "You are the reason I want to stay. Not the ranch, not the roof, you." The wind screamed, snow hissed against the window. The fire crackled and threw shadows on the wall that jumped and danced like living things. Caleb sat very still for a long time. So still that Clara began to wonder if she had made a terrible mistake, if she had opened a door she should have left shut, if she had handed this man her heart and he was going to hand it back. Then he spoke, and his voice broke. Not cracked, broke. The way a dam breaks, the way a river breaks through ice in spring. 8 years of silence and control and iron discipline coming apart in the space of a sentence. "Clara, I need to tell you the truth about the letter." She looked at him, confused. "My mother did not write that letter." He was staring at the fire. His jaw was tight. His hands, those enormous, capable hands, were shaking. "I wrote it. I forged her handwriting. I used her name. I sent it to a newspaper in Philadelphia." The words came out like stones being pulled from a wall, each one leaving a gap. "I wrote it because I was lonely. Lonely in a way I did not think a person could survive. I sat in that kitchen at 2 in the morning with a bottle of whiskey and 6 empty chairs, and I thought, if I do not hear another voice in this house, a voice that is not my brother's, a voice that belongs to someone who chose to be here, I am going to lose my mind. But I was too proud to use my own name, too ashamed to admit that Caleb Thornton, the man everybody thinks is made of granite, was sitting in the dark, writing a letter begging a stranger to come save him." He stopped. His chest rose and fell. His eyes, the storm-gray eyes that never showed anything, were wet. Lamplight caught the moisture and turned it to silver. "I did not expect anyone to answer. And then you did. And I panicked. I told my brother's mother had written it before she died. A half-truth they were willing to believe because they wanted to believe it. Because they were lonely too, even if they would never say so." He looked up, looked at her. And in his face, Clara saw something she had never seen in any man. Absolute vulnerability, the total absence of armor. A man standing in the wreckage of the walls he had built around himself for almost a decade, knowing he could never rebuild them and not sure he wanted to. I love you, Clara. I have loved you since the first night you sat in my kitchen with a pencil in your hand and told me my bookkeeping was a disaster. I loved you when you stood up to Cordelia Pruitt without flinching. I loved you when you fed my brothers and cleaned my house and mended my coat without being asked. I loved you when you found the weakness in Mercer's note and saved our land. I have loved you every day, and I have not said it because I am afraid. His voice dropped to something barely above breath. The last time I loved someone, she died 3 weeks before I could marry her, and it nearly killed me. I did not think I could survive that kind of loss again. So I locked the door, and I threw away the key, and I told myself I would never love anyone again. And then you stepped off a train in shoes with holes in them and $12 in your pocket, and you ruined everything. Silence, except the storm, except the fire, except two hearts beating so hard they were almost audible. Clara looked at this man, this enormous, weathered, stubborn, terrified man sitting on the floor of a cabin, the size of a closet, tears running into his stubble, his hands shaking, having just given her the one thing he had sworn never to give anyone again. You wrote that, Eder, she said slowly. Yes. You found me. I was not looking for you specifically. I was looking for anyone, but then you came. And you were not anyone. You were you. Clara felt something loosen in her chest, a knot she had been carrying so long she had forgotten it was there. The knot of being unwanted, of being discarded, of being the girl nobody chose, the orphan, nobody claimed, the woman nobody protected. Thank you, she said. Caleb blinked. What? Thank you for writing that letter. Because if you had not, I do not know where I would be right now. Maybe on the street, maybe back with Hargrove, maybe nowhere at all. Clara, I love you, Caleb Thornton. She said it the way she said everything, plainly, directly, without decoration, the way a woman says something she means with her entire body. I love your loneliness and your stubbornness and your terrible bookkeeping and your forged letter. All of it. Caleb Thornton cried, for the first time since Lenora Cartwright died in the spring of 1879. Not loudly, not with sobs, just tears running silent down the rough terrain of his face, catching the firelight falling into his beard. Say it again, he whispered. I love you. He reached for her, drew her close, slowly, as though she were made of something precious and breakable. He pressed his lips to her forehead, gently, reverently. The way you touch a thing you have wanted so long, you are not entirely sure it is real. She lifted her face. Their lips met, soft, tentative, tasting of coffee and wood smoke, and 8 years of waiting. Then deeper, as the fear gave way to the certainty that this was not a dream and they did not have to be afraid anymore. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, two broken hearts found each other in the firelight and began the long, slow work of healing. When dawn came, the storm had passed. Sunlight poured through the small window of the line shack in a column of gold so bright it seemed solid enough to touch. Clara opened her eyes. Her head rested on Caleb's shoulder. A blanket was wrapped around them both. The fire still burned in the stove. His hand held hers even in sleep. Even unconscious, his fingers had not let go. She looked at his face. Relaxed in sleep, it was a different landscape. Younger. The lines of worry and control smoothed out, the tension in his jaw released. He looked, she thought, like the man he might have been if life had been kinder. His eyes opened, gray, finding blue. For a moment, the old fear flickered across his face, the instinct to pull away, to rebuild the wall, to pretend the night had not happened. Then it passed, like a cloud crossing the sun and moving on. You are home now, he said, the same words he had spoken on her first day. But they meant something completely different now. On that first day, they meant you can stay. This morning, lying in a line shack in the middle of Montana with the sunlight turning her hair to gold, they meant you are my home. They rode back to the ranch together. Boone was standing on the porch. He had been up all night. Wyatt was beside him, hollow-eyed with worry. Jed sat in his chair with his pipe, the only one who appeared entirely calm, as though he had known all along exactly how this would end. "You are alive," Boone said. And the relief in his voice, the raw, unguarded relief, told Clara more about who Boone Thornton really was than anything he had ever said or done. "We are alive," Caleb said. And the way he said "we," the way his hand rested on the small of Clara's back as they walked into the house, told everyone everything they needed to know. Wyatt's grin split his face in half. He punched Boone in the shoulder. "Told you." Boone grunted, but the corner of his mouth moved. Upward, just slightly. The days that followed were good, the quiet kind of good. Clara and Caleb did not make speeches or grand declarations. They simply stopped hiding. They sat closer at dinner. Their hands found each other beneath the table. Their eyes met and held without flinching. The temperature of the house changed. Something warm had entered it that had nothing to do with the stove. And then the letter arrived. It came on a Tuesday, delivered by the mail rider from Copper Creek. A legal document from a firm in Helena, forwarded from Philadelphia. Franklin Hargrove had filed formal theft charges against Clara Whitfield. $500 in Bipam and a silver heirloom necklace allegedly stolen. A warrant had been requested through the territorial courts. If granted, Clara could be arrested, extradited to Pennsylvania, and tried. Clara found the letter on Caleb's desk. He had not shown it to her. He had been trying to figure out what to do before she saw it. But she saw it, and she read it, and she understood. If she stayed, she would bring the law down on this ranch, on Caleb, on his brothers. Hargrove had money. Hargrove had lawyers. And the law, even false law, has weight. She loved Caleb Thornton, do you? She loved this ranch and these men and this life more than anything she had ever loved. And because she loved them, she could not be the thing that destroyed them. She wrote a note, short, steady hand despite the shaking. "You said this was my home. But home is not where you go. Home is what you protect. I am leaving to protect you." She packed her suitcase at 3 in the morning, the same suitcase she had carried off the train 5 months ago. She put on her shoes, the ones with holes that Caleb had replaced with new boots he never admitted buying. She left the boots beside her bed. She left the sheepskin coat on the hook. She left the note on the kitchen table. And she walked out into the dark. She made it 3 miles down the road to Copper Creek before she heard the hoofbeats. Coming fast, coming hard. The sound of a horse being ridden flat out in the dark by a man who did not care what happened to himself as long as he got where he was going. Caleb pulled up in front of her. The horse was lathered. His chest was heaving. His face in the pre-dawn gray was something Clara had never seen. Not anger, not grief, something beyond both. The look of a man who had woken up and found the world emptied of the one thing that made it bearable. He swung down from the saddle, walked toward her, took the suitcase from her hand gently but without hesitation and set it in the dirt. "Come back." "I cannot stay. Hargrove will..." "Come back." "Caleb, listen to me." He took her hands, both of them, small and cold inside his, which were large and warm and trembling. He held them the way a man holds something he is afraid of dropping. And he spoke. "Clara Whitfield." His voice was rough and uneven, and it cracked in places where the control could not hold. "I lost Lenora to sickness. I could not stop it. I lost my father to whiskey. I could not stop that either. But I will not lose you because you walked away in the dark thinking you were protecting me." He paused, breathed. The sky was turning purple at the edge of the mountains. "I do not need protecting. I need you. Hargrove wants to press charges. Let him. I have a sheriff. I have a lawyer. I have 3 Thornton men and the truth. What does Hargrove have? Lies. Lies do not win in Montana. Not against the truth. Not against us." He tightened his grip on her hands. "A man keeps his word, and my word is this. You stay. You come home. Now." Clara looked at him. Tears on her face whined in her hair, $12 richer than the day she arrived, but 10,000 times less alone. And she let herself do the things she had never done before. She let someone fight for her. Not because she was weak, because she was strong enough to trust. "Take me home," she whispered. Caleb lifted her onto the saddle, climbed up behind her, and they rode back to the ranch as the first light of morning broke over the mountains, painting the sky in colors so vivid they looked like something a painter would be embarrassed to invent. Gold, rose, amber, purple. And above it all, the deep and perfect blue of a Montana sky that is finished with storms and decided for now to be kind. The Hargrove matter was settled within the month. Caleb Boone and Sheriff Harlan Bradley assembled the evidence. Three Thornton brothers willing to testify to Clara's character. Old Jed, who had known her for 5 months and was prepared to tell any judge in the territory that she was the most honest woman he had met in 65 years of living. And a lawyer in Helena who discovered through inquiries in Philadelphia that Franklin Hargrove had filed 2 previous fraudulent claims against former employees, both of which had been dismissed. The man had a pattern. The warrant request was denied. Hargrove never came to Montana. Clara Whitfield was free. Legally, formally, completely free. For the first time in her adult life, nobody was looking for her. Nobody had a claim on her. Nobody could drag her back to a life she had not chosen. She was free, and she chose to stay. One afternoon in late May, Caleb took Clara upstairs and stopped in front of the locked door. He reached into his vest pocket and produced a small brass key worn smooth with years of being carried and never used. He turned the lock, opened the door. The room was small. Dust lay thick on every surface. Inside the wardrobe hung a white dress yellowed with age. A wedding dress, never worn. On the windowsill, a jar of dried flowers crumbled almost to powder. On the desk, a letter in faded ink. And on the wall, a small photograph in a wooden frame. A young woman with a bright smile and kind eyes. Lenora Cartwright, dead at 24. Loved beyond measure. Mourned for 8 years behind a locked door. Lenora, Caleb said. His voice was quiet. But for the first time in all the years Clara had known about this room and this woman, his voice was not heavy with grief. It was something else, something closer to peace. I loved her. And when she died, I thought locking this door meant keeping her safe inside where nothing else could touch her. But I was not keeping her. I was keeping the pain, locking it away so I would never have to face it. He looked at Clara. I am ready to let go now, not forget her. I will never forget her. But let go of the pain. Make room for something new. Clara stepped into the room. She looked at the photograph, at the girl with the bright eyes who had loved this same man and been loved back and had died before she could wear the dress that hung in the wardrobe. She was beautiful, Clara said softly, and she was lucky to have been loved by you. I was lucky, Caleb said, twice. They cleaned the room together. The wedding dress was folded carefully and placed in a cedar chest. The photograph was moved downstairs to the parlor wall where light could reach it, where Lenora belonged, not as a secret locked away, but as a part of this family's story. The dried flowers were scattered on the hillside where she was buried, returned to the earth. The empty room was painted, cleaned, fitted with a work table and a sewing frame. It became Clara's workshop, the place where she cut leather and stitched gloves and built the small enterprise that would over the years become as much a part of the Thornton ranch as the cattle and the horses. The locked door was open, and Caleb Thornton, after 8 years, finally walked out of the past. He proposed on the last day of May. He took her to the old oak tree south of the creek, the tree where he had proposed to Lenora 9 years earlier. Clara knew the significance. She had stood beneath this tree alone months ago, wondering about the woman Caleb had loved, wondering if she would ever be more than a replacement. I know what this place means, she said. So do I, and I have never been more certain of anything. He did not kneel. The ground was muddy, and Caleb Thornton was a practical man. He stood in front of her and held both her hands in his, the way he had held them on the road when he brought her back, and he said what he needed to say. Clara Whitfield, I am blunt, and I am quiet, and my bookkeeping is a catastrophe. I lied to you about the letter. I was afraid for too long. But I love you with everything I have and everything I am. A man keeps his word, and my word is that I will love you until there is no breath left in my body to say it. Clara looked up at him, at the gray eyes that were not guarded anymore, at the silver at his temples, at the scar on his nose and the stubble on his jaw and the hands that were calloused from a lifetime of work and gentle enough to hold a newborn calf or a woman's arm. I came to Montana with a suitcase and a letter, she said. I found 3 brothers, a ranch, and the love of my life. Yes, Caleb Thornton. The answer is yes. He pulled her close, held her against his chest. Somewhere on the prairie, a meadowlark sang. They were married in June. The church in Copper Creek was small and white and held maybe 40 people, which was exactly enough because 40 people came. Ranchers and their sires from every homestead within a day's ride, the shopkeepers from town, the blacksmith, the liveryman, even the bartender from the White Pine Saloon who shaved for the occasion and looked uncomfortable in a collar. Clara wore a dress she had made herself, white cotton, simple, elegant, not fancy. The dress of a woman who knew who she was and did not need silk to prove it. She carried wildflowers picked from the prairie that morning, purple and yellow and white tied with a ribbon that had once decorated the Thornton parlor that Christmas. Caleb wore his best suit, which was his only suit, and still looked like a cowboy who had wandered into the wrong building. His hair was combed for perhaps the third time in living memory. His boots were polished. His gray eyes as Clara walked toward him down the aisle were bright and full, and for once completely unguarded. Wyatt stood as best man. His eyes were red from trying not to cry a battle he lost comprehensively before the first hymn was finished. Boone stood beside Wyatt. His face was its usual granite, but when Clara passed him on the aisle, his lips moved. Two words barely audible. Deserved this. Old Jed sat in the front pew. He did not try to hide his tears. He wiped them with a dirty handkerchief and blew his nose with a sound like a Canada goose and did not care who heard. Cordelia Pruitt sat in the back. She did not smile. But when Clara passed her, Cordelia said something quiet. Just two words. Congratulations, Mrs. Thornton. Not warm, but real. Perhaps Cordelia looked at Clara and saw for the first time a reflection of herself. A woman who had come west by mail 25 years ago and built a life from nothing. A secret she had guarded with cruelty because the truth of it made her ashamed. Sheriff Harlan Bradley shook Caleb's hand on the church steps. Your father built this ranch with his own hands. You built a family with your own heart. Caleb swallowed hard, nodded, could not speak. The first summer passed golden and warm. Clara took over the ranch accounts permanently, and within 3 months the operation was running tighter than it had in years. Caleb laughed more, told stories at dinner, played cards with Wyatt on the porch in the long evenings, while the sun set in colors that belonged in paintings. Autumn brought apples and the smell of wood smoke and the first cool mornings that reminded everyone that winter was never far away in Montana. And in late October, Clara told Caleb she was carrying their child. He was standing in the kitchen when she said it. He went completely still. His face went white, then red, then something beyond color. Something that belonged to a man who had spent 10 years believing he would never have this moment, and then suddenly impossibly had it. He crossed the kitchen in 2 strides, lifted her off the ground, turned her in a circle, and laughed. A real laugh, a full laugh. The laugh of a man who had been given back a thing he thought was lost forever. Wyatt, who overheard from the hallway, erupted into the kitchen with both arms raised. I am going to be an uncle. I am going to be the greatest uncle who ever lived. I am going to teach that child to ride before it can walk. Boone went outside. Clara followed him onto the porch and found him standing with his back to the door looking at the mountains, his shoulders tight. When he turned around, his eyes were wet. Mother would have been happy, he said, and his voice, usually so sharp and guarded, broke on the last word like a branch under too much snow. The children came. 2 girls and a boy spaced across the years the way children arrive on a working ranch between calving seasons and harvest in the long Montana winters that keep people close. The boy came first. They named him Jacob after his grandfather. He had Caleb's gray eyes and Clara's quick mind and a stubbornness that could only have come from both sides combined. By the age of 5, he could saddle a pony by himself, and by 7, he was riding the fence line with his father, small and serious on a horse that was too big for him, learning the land the way Caleb had learned it from Jacob. The first daughter was Mary, named for the grandmother she would never meet. She had Clara's yellow hair and an instinct for numbers that made her the family bookkeeper before she was 12. She also inherited her mother's talent with a needle and thread, and by 16 she was sewing riding jackets that ranch wives ordered from 3 counties away. The youngest was named Lenora, after the woman who had loved Caleb first and died before she could share his life. Clara chose the name. Caleb, when she told him, sat silent for a long time, his jaw working, his eyes fixed on the photograph of Lenora Cartwright that hung on the parlor wall in a shaft of afternoon light. Then he nodded, and Clara saw that the nod was not grief, it was gratitude. Gratitude that the past was not forgotten. Gratitude that it had been folded into the present with gentleness instead of jealousy. Little Lenora turned out to be the wildest of the three. She climbed everything. She rode too fast. She argued with her brothers and sisters and uncles with a ferocity that made old Jed shake his head and say she reminded him of Jacob Thornton himself. She had gray eyes and a dimple on her left cheek and a laugh that could be heard from the barn. Wyatt married in the fourth year. Margaret Holloway, the new school teacher who arrived in Copper Creek with spectacles and a trunk full of books and a spine made of the same material they used for railroad ties. She was small and quiet and completely unintimidated by three enormous Thornton men. Wyatt courted her by reading aloud to her on the porch in the evenings, stumbling over the longer words, grinning when she corrected him. They built a house on the west section of the ranch property, close enough to walk to the main house for Sunday dinner. Boone never married, but he became the uncle that every child should have. The one who teaches you to shoot and ride and track an elk through timber. The one who speaks little but means every word. The one who sits on the porch in the evening and tells you stories about the old days in a voice like gravel and smoke. And who, when you are frightened by a storm or a bad dream, picks you up in arms the size of fence posts and carries you to the fire and sits with you until the fear passes. He softened over the years. Not much, not obviously, but the sharp edges wore down the way river stones wear smooth gradually through constant contact with the people who loved him. He never spoke of Ruby Dawson again. Whatever wound she had left had been healed not by forgetting, but by the slow accumulation of a family that chose him every day. Old Jed lived to 80. He died in his sleep on a January night, so cold the creek froze 6 inches deep. They buried him on the hill beside Jacob and Mary Thornton because Jed was family, had been family since the first fence post was driven into the ground, and family does not require a shared name. At the funeral, Clara placed a sprig of dried lavender on the coffin, the same lavender that had been in the jar on the windowsill of Mary Thornton's room the day Clara arrived. Caleb stood beside her, his hand on her back, his gray hair blown by the wind, and said, "He knew about the letter. He saw me write it. He never told a soul." "He was a good man," Clara said. "He was the best man I ever knew." Winter always ends. Jed had told her that on her first week at the ranch pipe in his teeth eyes on the stars. And he had been right. Every winter ended, even the winters inside a man's heart. Cordelia Pruitt, of all people, became something unexpected. Not a friend exactly, but a presence, a fixture. She stopped spreading gossip about Clara after the wedding, and gradually over years of proximity and the slow erosion of pretense that comes with age, she admitted the truth. On a Christmas afternoon loosened by 2 glasses of sherry, she told Clara that she herself had been a mail-order bride 25 years earlier. She had hidden it, been ashamed of it, and her cruelty toward Clara had been the cruelty of a woman who saw her own secret reflected in someone else's face and could not bear the mirror. Clara poured her another glass of sherry and said nothing about it ever again. Hank Mercer sold his ranch 4 years after the debt was settled. He had lost influence, lost allies, lost the political leverage that had made him dangerous. The new owner, a quiet German immigrant named Bauer, turned out to be an excellent neighbor. Mercer moved to San Francisco. Word came back years later that he had died alone in a boarding house with a view of the bay and not a single person to close his eyes. Clara thought about that sometimes. The loneliness that destroys a man when he has everything except the thing that matters. She thought about Caleb writing that letter at 2 in the morning. She thought about herself on that train with $12 and a suitcase. And she thought about how close both of them had come to becoming Hank Mercer. Alone in a room, looking out at a beautiful view, with nobody to share it. They were married 30 years. 30 years of Montana winters and Montana summers. 30 years of cattle and horses and fence posts and broken machinery and blizzards and droughts and grasshopper plagues and 2 floods and 1 tornado that took the barn roof off and scattered it across the south pasture like playing cards. 30 years of Sunday dinners, of Wyatt's laughter and Boone's silences and Jed's pipe smoke and Margaret's spectacles and the sound of children running through the house that Jacob and Mary Thornton had built with their own hands on land they had cleared from wilderness. 30 years of sleeping beside the same man, of hearing his breathing in the dark, of knowing the exact weight of his arm across her waist and the exact temperature of his hand when it found hers under the quilt, of loving him more at 60 than she had at 24, which she would not have believed possible if someone had told her, but which turned out to be the simplest truth she knew. Christmas Eve, 30 years after Clara stepped off the train. The Thornton Ranch house blazed with light, every window golden, smoke from the chimney rising straight into a sky so full of stars it looked like someone had spilled a bucket of diamonds across black velvet. Inside the house was full. Jacob, the eldest son, now 30, stood by the fire with his wife bouncing a baby on his hip. Mary, 28, sat at the table with her ledger still keeping the books, still catching errors, still her mother's daughter. Little Lenora, who was not little anymore at 26, had brought her husband, a horsebreaker from Wyoming, who was 6'4" and terrified of her. Wyatt and Margaret were there with their 3 children. Boone sat in his usual chair, gray-haired now, slower than he used to be, but still capable of silencing a room with a look. The table was set for 16, every chair filled. Roast turkey, potatoes, biscuits, pie. The smells that had been filling this house every Christmas since Clara first heated that cast-iron stove and proved her worth with flour and lard and the stubborn refusal to sit idle. After dinner, after the dishes, after the stories and the poings and the children being carried to bed, protesting that they were not tired, Caleb and Clara sat together by the fire. Just the 2 of them. The way they sat every Christmas Eve. The way they had sat that first Christmas when the house was bare and the future was uncertain and the only warmth came from a stove and a ribbon and the first fragile hope that life might not be over after all. Caleb's hair was white. His hands were weathered like old oak. But his back was straight, and his eyes, those gray eyes, still held the same quiet intensity they had held the day she met him. The same storm, the same depth. And now something they had not held then. Peace. Clara's hair was silver. Her hands bore the marks of 30 years of ranch work, kitchen work, sewing work, the work of building a life stitch by stitch and day by day. She wore a simple dress. The cameo brooch at her throat, the one thing she had carried from Philadelphia, the last trace of her mother. It had survived everything, just like her. A small girl climbed into Clara's lap, 4 years old, cornflower blue eyes, honey blonde hair, a face so like Clara's at that age that looking at her was like looking through a window in time. "Grandma, tell the story about you and Grandpa." Clara smiled, looked at Caleb. He smiled back. That smile, still rare, still precious, still capable after 30 years of making her heart beat faster. "Once upon a time," Clara began, "there was a young woman who was very lonely. She had nothing in the world except a suitcase and a letter. And she got on a train, the last train, and she rode it all the way to Montana in the coldest winter she had ever known. And when she stepped off that train, she did not find what the letter promised. She found something much better." "What did she find, Grandma?" Clara looked out the window. Snow was falling on the prairie, soft and white and endless. The same snow that had been falling the day she arrived. The same mountains on the horizon, the same sky, but everything else was different. Everything else was full. "She found home," Clara said. Caleb reached over and took her hand, his fingers laced through hers, rough and warm and familiar as her own heartbeat. "You are home now," he said. The same 4 words. The first time he had said them, they were permission to stay. Now, 30 years later, they carried the weight of everything they had built and lost and rebuilt together. 3 children, 10 grandchildren. A ranch that had survived every storm Montana could conjure. A love that had started with a forged letter and a leak and become the truest thing either of them had ever known. Outside the snow fell, inside the fire burned, and around the table that Jacob Thornton had built with his own hands 40 years ago, the table with 6 chairs that had once held only 3 lonely men, every single chair was full.